Hey, Revolutionaries, I'm excited to bring you this week's episode with Richard Rosser, who is a Hollywood industry veteran. Yes, he's been a writer, producer, assistant director in many capacities, both in movies and in TV. And, you know, if you start going down his list of credits, he's been involved in projects such as Still, a Michael J. Fox movie, Grey's Anatomy, MacGyver, This Is Us, Chicago Med, Quantico, Kingdom, The Neighbors, The Mentalist, Melrose Place, MTV Reloaded, On the Edge, Lizzie McGuire, The Huntress, Sorority, Shades of Dusk, Ghosts of Christmas Eve. I mean, the list goes on and on. If you go to his the Dana Carvey show, if you go to his IMDb. Anyways, he's really been a veteran storyteller for all these years, and now he's pivoting and doing some consulting in the business world and talking about storytelling and how to apply it to brands and businesses, and also how to incorporate artificial intelligence using ChatGPT 4. So it's very interesting to get his perspective, certainly because right now, if you haven't noticed, that the writers in Hollywood are on strike. Yes, it's a crazy time for them, and I was just looking up to see, like, are they still on strike? What's the deal with it? And I'm finding quotes like this: Hollywood studios WGA strike endgame is to let writers go broke before resuming talks in the fall. Wow. Okay, so this is like, here's another quote from one industry CEO. I think we're in for a long strike, and they're going to let it bleed out, said one industry veteran intimate with the POV of studio CEOs, point of view of the studio CEOs. So it sounds like this is really going to be a tough negotiation, and they're going to be on strike for a while. And certainly part of these talks are what's going to happen with artificial intelligence, with AI, the AI era opening up here, and having rights to your own likeness and image and all that kind of stuff going forward in terms of the AI. I mean, the contract talks are just going to be brutal, I think. And it's a tough time because maybe they're going to be shooting themselves in the foot, the writers, because maybe they might just start to be replaced in some ways because of AI. So we'll see what happens. Anyways, before we get to the episode, I just wanted to remind everybody to sign up for the mailing list. If you haven't signed up yet, go to JimJim'sReinventionRevolution.com and sign up. And if you do, you get a free download, an automatic download of 7 simple ways to prime your mind for reinvention. That's right, 7 simple ways to prime your mind for reinvention. I know it's tough. You got all these ideas you want to try, or things you want to change about what you're doing, or maybe, you know, career change in mind, or, you know, just changing your lifestyle or diet or whatever it might be. But it's hard to actually get there. And I figured out that, you know, you got to have to really start disrupting your patterns and opening your mind to be available for change, to be available for reinvention. So I got 7 simple ways to do it. So download that. And also, if you are on the email list and you got your email working, you can always send an email to JimJim@JimJim'sReinventionRevolution.com. And let me know what's going on. You can send me some feedback there if you like. And if there's any topics of interest out there that you want me to dive into for you, let me know. Okay? All right. So let's figure out what's going on with AI, ChatGPT 4, and storytelling with Richard. Here we go.
Welcome to Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast, the show that explores reinvention in the digital age as it relates to career, creativity, and technology. Stay tuned for interviews with professionals, entrepreneurs, and creatives that have reimagined success and are making a pivot. If you'd like to listen to the entire back catalog, visit JimJim'sReinventionRevolution.com for instant access. And now, here's your host, Jim.
All right, let's do it. Well, we'll do it this way. No problem. Hey, everybody. Hey, this is Jim. Welcome to episode 107 of Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast. I'm talking today with Richard Rosser, and we're talking about how ChatGPT and AI is writing a new story for Hollywood and for all the rest of us. So, Richard, welcome to the Reinvention Revolution.
I love it, Jim. I absolutely love it. Yeah, everything for me, everything is story based. So,
Okay, so that's why I came up with this this intro. So I was hoping you would recognize the power of story there. You see what I did there?
of
Uh,
course I do. Of course I do.
okay, yeah. Thanks for coming on, and I know you're all about story, and I can't wait to dig into some of the minutia about it and your understanding of it. Because I've never talked to an expert, a real story expert like yourself before. I'm learning more about it for myself, for business, for the podcast, for the things I'm doing now. But let's start with this new path that you're on, okay? Because
Sure.
everybody's listening is interested most likely in themselves doing something different, and that's one of the many things that are interesting about talking to you and about what you're into these days. So you're on this new path with AI Explained, where you're digging into ChatGPT, and that's AIexplained.ai. That's your new website.
Correct.
But you've been educating, speaking, consulting with businesses and universities, out of your normal realm of
Mhm.
the Hollywood scene that you've been in. So tell people what you're doing now currently with this business model, or however you perceive it, uh, what you've been doing and how you got there, how long you've been doing it, because it's fairly recent.
Sure. Well, so Jim, just to get up to speed a little bit, so I've had a 30 some odd year career in the TV and film business. And so I'm a true professional storyteller. I work on TV shows, Grey's Anatomy, Chicago Med, 24, This Is Us. And through the years, I realized the power, of course, of storytelling from an entertainment standpoint. But then I really started realizing the value of storytelling on an everyday basis. And so what I do now is I go out and I work with businesses and, as you said, colleges. I'm working with a career tech center in Oklahoma where I grew up,
Mm-hmm.
and we talk about the power of story and how we get those stories out, how we make those stories compelling and captivating, and the connections that we can make with those stories, and how we can really infuse our stories with emotion. And so, as I've been doing that the past year and a half to 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as AI has really come to the forefront with ChatGPT and Bard and Bing and all the various generative text models,
Mm-hmm.
now I started using ChatGPT to help me organize workshops and seminars and webinars. And I took this deep dive into this new technology and realized that from a story standpoint, this is an incredible tool. And when I talk about ChatGPT as a tool, let's use an analogy of an engineer or a mathematician and a calculator, right?
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't think of asking an engineer who's designing SpaceX to only use a piece of paper and a pencil.
Right.
You'd expect that person to use a program, either a computer program or a calculator, high-end calculator, to help them make the calculations they need to make to put that rocket up into space. And so creatively, we can and need to use everything at our disposal, whether we're in marketing or whether we're truly an artist, a
Right.
composer or a visual artist or a writer. We can use the technology to help us amplify our own individualism and creativity. And so that's what I'm really doing is since January, I've combined my storytelling approach and the new technology through ChatGPT and AI in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm fusing the two, so it ends up becoming AI enhanced storytelling that we can use the technology to amplify our message, to make our stories more compelling, to be more creative in terms of our approach to storytelling in the first place.
I see. Okay, so you said a couple of things here I want to just poke at a little bit. So you
Sure.
were already consulting and using your storytelling expertise out there, other than in Hollywood, already before you before ChatGPT came on the scene for you, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you already had this model of why it's important talking to other groups of people, right? Obviously for marketing and branding, in the business world or in the communication, just just for communicating, in a better, higher way or whatever,
Let me
right?
let me just pause there and say we'll come back to that, what you just said in terms of marketing and communication. We'll
Okay.
come back to that in a sec. So
Okay,
I'll
good.
make a
All
mental
right.
note. But keep
Yeah,
going.
because I think that's interesting. How you're leveraging. Obviously you have this super deep expertise in the Hollywood zone, but leveraging that into other areas is
Mhm.
pretty interesting. Making that pivot. But then what my question was, how did it happen? How did it happen for you when you got alerted to, like, I should check this thing out? I've been hearing so much about AI and ChatGPT, and oh my God, what's really going on here? And when you first started playing around with it, what did you do, and what was your reaction to it? I guess
Well, so
what was your gut feeling of, like, holy crap, like
yeah.
everyone in Hollywood's out of a job, or
No,
oh
no,
my God,
no.
this is amazing, and I got to get on the train immediately as fast as possible.
Well, so as I mentioned before, I work with I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and startups, and so one of them connected me with this career school in Oklahoma, and they've got 10,000 some odd students, 4 different campuses spread across Oklahoma City,
Mm-hmm.
and so I contacted them. I did a couple of workshops there about storytelling and creating a storytelling culture on the campus of their schools.
Hmm.
And then one of the folks, they have a workplace economic development program. And so he said, hey, you know what? We need a storytelling class for trainers. And I
Hmm.
said, all right, consider it done. And, we hung up the Zoom call and I said, storytelling for trainers. I don't know anything about trainers. And I was lamenting with a friend, and he said, "Oh man, you should check out ChatGPT. It's this new AI program that it's like a Google search engine on steroids."
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, okay, I'll try anything right now. So I jumped on and I started entering
So okay, so
information.
you got this through a friend. It wasn't through sort of the media or business shows or anything
Correct.
like
This
that.
was back in early January, so
Okay,
it had
interesting.
just come out in November. And a
Right.
friend of mine who's a real tech, he's a real tech guy.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Oh, you should check out. It's great for helping you organize. It's great for sort of thinking outside the box."
Sure.
And so I went on, and to tell you the truth, the first thing I did was I typed in create a short little paragraph story about finding a lost dog. I have no idea where I came up with that idea. Just
Okay.
stuff pops in your head.
Right.
But I thought,
Sure.
let's just see what this comes up with, right? And it spit out a little 50-word story or something like that. And then I said, okay, now recreate that story or rewrite the story as though you're Hemingway. And it came back and it was Hemingway. And then I said, okay, what about Edgar Allan Poe? And then
Right.
what about J.K. Rowling? And
Mm-hmm.
then what about Hunter S. Thompson? I was sort of going, okay, now what? Hunter S. Thompson with this crazy. All right, we're walking through the casino and knee deep in
Right.
alligators, and it came up with this crazy story about this dog that he finds that's a crazy dog, and
Right.
and so every single iteration of this little mini story, again, it was only 50 or 60 words long, really encapsulated the feel and the flavor of what these writers, their approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of went, I did, I had a holy crap moment, Jim.
Right.
And
Right.
and I just sort of went, oh my gosh. And then I got to the point where I felt, okay, I'm starting to understand this. And so I said, all right, well, what the heck what would a workshop on storytelling for trainers look like? And I typed that in and boom, it spits back, I don't know, 500 or 600 words, all in bullet points of, okay, the first part of the session would be this, the introduction, and I just went,
Right.
whoa.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, step back a second, and after I went, whoa, I started reading it, and some of it was complete garbage.
Yeah. Well.
It was absolute. I mean, some of it was just like, okay, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. It has nothing to do with storytelling for trainers.
Right.
It went off the tracks.
Gobbledygook. Yeah.
But part of it was fantastic,
Mm-hmm.
and it got me started. And then I hit, for those of you who don't really know ChatGPT, you can ask for another generation, right? You can ask it to
Right.
regenerate your response. So I hit regenerate, and up came some more crap and some more great stuff.
Hmm.
And, Jim, it's almost like you hear about these comedians who, Jerry Seinfeld, he hasn't been on the road for years. And he says, I want to do a show. So he goes down to his local comedy club where he's been performing for, 40 some odd years off and on.
Right.
And he does a show. It's 10-minute set. And out of that 10-minute set, he gets a minute worth of, what he figures is really, really good material.
Sure.
Then he goes back the next night or a week later, he does another 10-minute set, incorporating the minute of the first set and 9 new minutes. And then after that, he's got like 2 minutes. And he slowly builds his material back up with what he knows is funny and working and really getting the audience to laugh because they're right there.
Right. He's
And
got that
so
feedback.
it's an iterative process. And so that's one of the things about ChatGPT and AI in general, in terms of the generative AI, is that it's an iterative process, and people need to play around with it. It's not like you just put one thing in, it comes out, and that's all there is to it.
Right.
You have to pretend like it's a playground. You have to have fun experiences with it. Push the limits. Ask it to do things you wouldn't normally ask a search engine. And
Sure.
so as I started to hone in on my take on what this storytelling for trainers class would be, I realized, okay, I'm taking elements of what I'm getting from ChatGPT, and then I'm infusing my personality with that.
Hmm.
Right? You mentioned something, in your question. I had a 4-part answer to my previous question, and then you had a 4-part question to the question you asked me. Well,
Right.
one of the things that I find is everyone's freaking out. Right now, some people are anxiously excited, and then
Yeah. Right.
others are anxiously, are anxiously
Just nervous,
awaiting
like
doom and
what could
gloom.
happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And part of that's, all the media and saying, oh my gosh, we're all going to become robots, and all our
Right.
communications just going to turn to mush. And my approach, Jim, is that this is a tool. And again, just like going back to my analogy about an engineer or a mathematician using a calculator, creative folks, and again, whether it's marketing or content creation for blog posts or
Hmm.
Twitter posts or whatever,
Right.
or organizing, outlining, brainstorming, we can use this technology to open up and think outside the box in ways we've never, ever thought outside the box before. And to me, that's one of the most incredible things about this new technology, is that when I sit down to work on something and I'm fleshing out an idea, it's like having 10 people in the room: a scientist, a philosopher, a writer, an
Right.
artist, a music, and it has a sphere of knowledge that, obviously goes way past what I have.
Sure.
Generative AI, it's trained on billions and billions and billions of pages and PDFs and master's theses and doctoral dissertations, et cetera, et cetera. And so, and blog posts and Twitter responses. And so you get some bad in with the good.
Hmm.
And but one of the things that I think people are really afraid of is that it's going to turn all of our communication just into mush. And so, for instance, if I use a prompt and I say, Jim, check it out, I got this great prompt, and I hand it over to you, and you use that same prompt, and we're both working on some sort of a blog post to different subjects. Well, even though our blog posts are about different things, they may sound very, very similar because of the prompt we used. Now,
Right. Right.
so ultimately, and if you hand it off to a friend and that person hands it off to 2 people or 5 people, all of a sudden this one prompt is out there in the world, and it could reduce all of the communication that everyone who uses it to very similar mush.
Right. Well, it could be.
However,
It's that structure you might recognize, right? Which
exactly,
maybe we get that now from like your local news or something. They have a certain structure to how they tell a story about
right.
headline story or something like that. It's 2 minutes of this, 1 minute of that, and then we cut away or whatever. We would probably recognize those things anyways. But if it's your subject matter, you're still interested, right? Right.
Well, exactly. But what I find is the folks who are really creative, really individualistic,
Hmm.
who are thinking original thoughts, they're going to take this technology. And just because you give a mathematician a calculator, it doesn't mean he's going to come up with the same ideas and
Of course not. Yeah.
concepts that
Right.
another mathematician or engineer is going to come up with. So if we take a prompt, if you send me a prompt and I then take that prompt and I say, okay, I want to infuse this with my personality, I'm going to say, okay, in this prompt, I'm going to say, all right, return a response that has a certain energy to it and has some humor and maybe some pop culture references. Well, that approach is instantly going to set our two blog posts apart.
Yeah, for sure.
And we're going to start to key into parts of our personality or writing style or composing style if you're a musician or if you're writing a poem to be a song lyrics. We're going to use the technology to amplify our own creativity and individualism. And that point, the fact that we as the humans are the critical thinkers, we're ultimately the arbiters of what is good, bad, ugly, in terms of what comes out with the responses that are generated from this technology.
Right.
We're the ones who ultimately decide what gets to be in the blog post or the song or the message that's crafted for marketing.
Right. Yeah, it's the point of view. It's your taste. I mean, I often think that's really what an artist brings to the party. It's just their point of view. It's not necessarily their technical
Oh,
skills
absolutely.
or whatever it might be. It's just like, wow, that's an interesting take. That's insightful, or it speaks to the right audience, or whatever it might be. Right.
I mean, a good example is comedians. I mean, think of
Yeah.
how the different comedians. You got Robin Williams, Jerry
Yeah.
Seinfeld, Jonathan Winters. I mean, those folks each have an individual approach and way that they have a certain lens that they look at the world through,
That's right. Yeah.
and and so that's what ultimately that's what ChatGPT and AI are going to do is allow us to create things for the world with this technology that enable us to really amplify our own position, our message, our creativity.
Right. Right. I got you. Okay. So let's rewind back to January now. So it's
Sure.
still January, which
Wow.
I love all this
You
stuff.
haven't
This
made
is
much
great.
progress, Jim.
But but you're like discovering it and you're like, oh my God, you're like, your brain just gets lit on fire. And the same thing same thing happened to me when I checked it out for a little bit. I
Oh
don't have
yeah.
too much experience with it, but I have some other business people I know that are using it, and for like you said, for blog posts or just trying to like break down like a certain topic that they want to talk about or think about, and they're just using it in that way to like, hey, break this thing down in 5 bullet points for me, and it
Yep.
just does it. I mean, it's just incredible. Like you said, it might get
It's
something wrong,
amazing.
but whatever. Okay, so you see this thing for the first time, and you're thinking like, oh my God, this is really helping me create this course for the trainers, right?
Right.
Okay. And so what do you do with it? You go teach that course for the trainers. How does this start to evolve into like, wait a second, since I'm kind of ahead of the game here, I'm getting this expertise of how to create prompts, how to think about using this thing. How does this start to morph into your actual process or presentations?
Well, so let me just sort of deconstruct that a little bit. All right.
Okay.
So first of all, um, I mean, we all have a creative process that we go through
Hmm.
with whatever we're creating. And so when I'm starting to work on a workshop or a seminar or create something like that, I'm thinking on multi-planes. I'm
Hmm.
thinking about the structure of the workshop. I'm thinking about the interactivity of the workshop. I'm thinking about the ultimate concept and the content of the workshop and what I need to get across for my client, in this case, the tech school. And I'm trying to pull all that together, right? It's like writing a script. You have to think about the actors. You have to think about, is it daytime, nighttime? What are the elements that help contribute to what the ultimate success of this thing that I'm creating?
Right.
And so what I did was I started brainstorming, and that was what I did when I said, okay, what would this workshop look like? I was brainstorming, and then I switched into outlining or organizational mode. And
Hmm.
I would take stuff that I liked and I would put it in, and I would take stuff that I didn't like and I would jettison that to what I call the boneyard, which is just, sort of like hanging out, waiting to be used again or thrown away entirely. And then as I would go through, I'd go through, I would go through brainstorming, outlining, and then research, because once I've got an outline, then I have to really research and come up with examples that work within the outline that I've created. Now, something to be said about ChatGPT and generative AI is that it has limitations. It has, and I'm not going to get into all the specifics, but it's got bias limitations. It has hallucination, information limitations in terms of
Hmm.
the information that it has stored in its system.
Right.
ChatGPT, they stopped inputting large bits of information in September 2021.
Right.
So it's limited in its knowledge after that. So, but enough about that.
Right.
But
It'll get
basically,
updated, but yeah, you just have to. There's some limitations, parameters you have
yeah,
to deal with,
exactly.
right?
So then actually before I actually taught the workshop, I stepped back and looked at what I created or what I created with the help of ChatGPT.
Hmm.
And I thought, okay, these are not storytellers. These are trainers. They're used to having materials and conveying the materials to trainees
Hmm.
and working through their seminar or workshop for training. And I said, these folks may be a little intimidated to come up with stories on their own that emphasize the points and help their trainees retain information, et cetera.
Right.
And so I thought, how can I help these folks create stories that work within what they're trying to do?
Hmm.
And I thought, you know what? What if I just create and this is going to be like a 6 to 7 hour seminar, a workshop. What if I create a section that is how to use ChatGPT as the basis for story creation for these stories? And
Hmm.
I went, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. It's sort of meta, right? In
Right.
terms of I'm using it, and so I put it in there. And when I pitched the folks and took them, through a walk through the workshop,
Right.
I was expecting because some folks in academia, they really have it's either you love the idea of ChatGPT or you absolutely hate it.
Yeah.
And so
100%.
I
A
was
lot
I
of them
was
I think hate it, or they just don't like the
oh,
progress of technology, or whatever it might be.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
so I was sort of waiting for a little knee-jerk reaction, a little backlash from having put this bit about ChatGPT in. And
Hmm.
at the end of when I pitched I went through walk through the whole workshop. I said, okay, anything that you all like, you want to expand on, or anything you want to jettison. One of the guys said, you know what? My favorite part is this access to ChatGPT and using it to
Hmm.
help create the stories that the trainers would be using in their training sessions. And I said, oh, wow.
Mm.
Okay. So that's really one of the seminal moments when I realized the power of this technology combined with story and storytelling
Right. I got you.
and the ability to help folks be more creative and be better communicators through story and not just saying, okay, we're going to use technology for technology's sake.
Hmm.
We're going to use this technology, and the end is to become a better storyteller, a better communicator. And ChatGPT is simply a means of really, Jim. It's a means of sort of speeding that process up, right?
Right.
Because if I had it probably sped up the process by 4 times or 5 times in terms
Right.
of putting this workshop together. And so that's what it can do for all of your listeners is it can be used as a tool to speed up the workflow and streamline the workflow of whatever they're doing. And I think of my approach to ChatGPT is really through a storyteller and a communicator's eyes. So I'm not a programmer. I'm not a coder.
Right.
So I don't think in terms of, okay, what information can I put in here and get Python code to come out that I can use to program an app that I'm working on or whatever it is. And that was literally a word salad that I just said. But so I think of it, how can I use this technology to fuel my creativity
Right.
and through workshops and seminars and my approach to storytelling and the story structure, and then ultimately help my clients become better communicators in terms of story overall. And so that's really how I ended up taking a deep dive. And at that point, I was one of the women who was on the call said, you know what? I'm breathing deeper. I had this anxiety about ChatGPT,
Mm.
and it's
Interesting.
gonna, I've got to get up to speed on it at 90 miles an hour. And she
Right.
said, and the way you explained it in the workshop proposal
Hmm.
is amazing because it reduces it to a tool that we can use for storytelling as opposed to something that's going to rule our lives and that we
Right.
have to know and have to get instant information on, or we're dead in the water.
Right.
And
Right.
so I think there's a lot of anxiety out there. And again, some anxiety that's excited to use it, but also anxiety of the doom and gloom of these possibilities of it, of ruining the world, of taking over society and all this kind of stuff, but also taking jobs.
Right.
And Mark Cuban has a quote. He says, "You better become knowledgeable about ChatGPT, or you're going to be a dinosaur in 3 years." Now it may be 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, or it may be 6 months. I
Right.
mean, who the heck knows at this point,
Yeah.
right?
Depending on what your job might be or your experience of life or your
Exactly.
needs are, it could be 6 months, could be tomorrow. I mean,
Geez, Jim.
or it could be 10 years and you're like, you know what? I don't play in that world. So who cares?
Exactly. I mean, look how long it's taken virtual, VR
Right. It's
to come
still
into
not,
play. I mean, it's still not really happening.
not really a
But
thing yet.
so my mission right now, it's interesting, Jim, because my mission is the same as it was a year ago. Back
Okay.
then, my mission was, okay, I am here to help folks become better communicators through story and the story narrative structure.
Hmm.
And now my goal is to help folks become better communicators, better storytellers through the narrative structure and utilizing technology to help fuel that, help streamline the process. So it's really use of ChatGPT is really an addendum to my original message and mission. And so I use that as a sort of a touch point, right? Whenever I get anxious myself too. When I dive into this, sometimes I think, oh my gosh, I need to know more. I need to know it now. If I'm
Right.
talking to people about this, they're going to expect me to know every single thing. Well, I mean, no one can know every single thing about ChatGPT and AI. I mean, even the people who are creating it, some of them are
Yes.
going, I don't know
Right.
what's going to happen with
Yeah.
it.
They don't even know what they've created. I don't think they necessarily understand the
Exactly.
impact of it yet. Nobody
So
does even.
true. So
It's
true.
so interesting. Well, that's yeah. I mean, it's just super cool that you got turned on to it, and that you're someone that has this particular reaction and vision about it, and say like, hey, you know what? I think I can use it in these ways. I think it can be a real tool. And one thing I wanted to mention, like how you're seeing it can be used for yourself and make things go quicker, more efficient, or whatever, more have more ideas come in. One thought that I had is that it enables people to augment really what they think their skill set is. So,
Absolutely.
like for me, okay, I'm more of an engineering science guy, technical guy, whatever. I'm not a great writer.
Hmm.
There's ideas that I have that'll be like, you know what, I'd love to see a blog about this topic, or here's the nuance that everybody misses whenever I read this topics on stuff that I'm interested in. Most of it's gobbledygook. Most of it was generated by some blog writer in some third world country, probably, that really
Right.
doesn't have the depth of understanding or the vision that I see. But I rarely do I see some of those things out there. But if I was a writer, I'd be writing and telling people about it, but I'm not. So
Hmm.
I just remain frustrated. But that's something that for me, it can really augment my skills in this way. And like you said, you can reach out if you are the writer, but you don't have a deep dive sense of science of technology or whatever avenue it might be, niche, that immediately you can augment your own experience without having an actual friend or close colleague that is of that ilk, right?
Oh, Jim,
That's super interesting to me.
yeah, and that's a fantastic point. And it sort of goes back to what I talked about originally when I first started using ChatGPT in terms of brainstorming mode.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've got this room full of folks, and again, I've got a writer, a philosopher, a mathematician, a scientist, and
Yeah.
it brings in all sorts of points of view. And the cool thing about ChatGPT is you can ask it to write as though it from a certain point of view, right? I
Right.
can ask it to write from a scientist's point of view, a
What would
philosopher.
Picasso say about this? I mean,
Exactly,
that's
exactly.
far out, right? I mean, to
Yeah,
really, see someone else's point of view and pick their own brain in a way.
it really is. But I want to go back. I made a mental note and I sort of jumped in at one point. I said, all right, we're going to come back to this. And
Okay.
because at one point you mentioned, all right, storytelling and using this technology for marketing purposes and for blog posts.
Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about, possible marketing uses and blog posts
Yeah.
and minor content creation. But what we haven't talked about is the value and the power of story in other ways.
Hmm.
And I work with a lot of startups and entrepreneurs who are, they're trying to get their product out there or their service out there. And one of the things we always do is we go back to, where did this come from?
Hmm.
Where did this product or service or idea, app, program come from? And why did it come into your brain with whatever startup founder or co-founders? And ultimately going back to the origin story of where this thing or process service was created. And that helps drive everything.
Right.
And the better a communicator, a founder or a CEO, president, the head of the organization is, the better that organization's going to bear out, because they can get their ideas across to folks. And there's a connection that comes with storytelling, an emotional connection. And when I say emotional connection, I don't mean tears, but I mean some sort of, happiness can be an emotion. Laughter is not necessarily an emotion, but it's indicative of an emotion. So ultimately, what you want to do as a leader, whether you're leading a team or a whole company, is you want to learn how to be a storyteller. And not everyone is inherently a storyteller. I mean, that's part of the reason I started doing what I was doing, was because I realized that there are people out there who don't understand how to really tell a compelling story, and a story that has a point, right? We have friends or relatives who tell a story and it just rambles on. And at the end, you sort of go, what the heck was that about? And why did I just spend 2 or 3 or 4 minutes of my life listening to what is essentially a non-story? And so what I do is I go in and I work with folks to figure out what the story can do on all levels. And for instance, when I went into this career tech school, the first workshop that I did with them is how to create a storytelling culture on campus that really permeates the entire experience. Because when I first pitched them, they said, oh, so you want to meet with our marketing department? I said, no. I want to meet with students and faculty and administration and all of the above. Because ultimately, it's when those stories collide or come upon each other that faculty members are using story to teach. And then they're enlisting the students to actually use storytelling to fulfill the assignment and to complete the assignment. And all of a sudden, story becomes a way of communicating. Instead of just writing down a true or false or multiple choice answer, the story that comes out of an assignment or a project becomes a driving force, so to speak. And so storytelling, it's not just for marketing. It's for all sorts of layers. It's about getting interdepartmental information in terms of what R&D is doing and what sales is doing. If R&D is hearing stories about what's happening out in the field, then they can implement those ideas and concepts that folks are using a product for out in the field that may be a slight tweak or a slight difference on what it was originally designed for. And out of that combination of factors can come really powerful possibilities, Joe.
Right. Well, 100% agree. And I'm glad you brought this up because I liked your take when we were talking earlier about how you see, I think you mentioned a statistic of, all communications, 85% are based on storytelling. What was that statistic you brought up?
Yeah,
Or is it just human communication, right?
Yeah, human communication on a daily basis. 85% of our communication is through story or some narrative structure.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned that. And I was thinking, the more I learn about myself, the more I learn about marketing, business, and just the mindset, like the mindset shifts that you need to take, how you need to disrupt your patterns to kind of reinvent yourself and do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's just like, it's 100%. and people may not understand when you say story exactly what that means. So I'm getting to a question I want to ask you. So, but I
Sure.
wanted to set it up for a second.
You want to tee it up.
So, because story is, your mind is just basically is just trying to recognize patterns so you don't like get eaten by a lion, basically, right? And that's how you walk through your day every day. It never goes away. And so when you see something, your mind's immediately is making up a story about it. That person's cool. That's safe. That person's interesting. Oh, that looks dangerous. I got to get out of here. And you just make up these crazy stories in your head, just visually, even before you even
Sure.
interact with someone, before you even look at them, before they even look at you. Once you look at someone, even across the street, that's another part to the story. Why is this person looking at me? Why am I looking at them? And it just goes on and on and on, stories all day long about, this person that you meet at work. Oh, they went to this certain school. Okay, the story starts again about what this person might be, or what color are they? What religion are they? Here's another story about how they might think. All this, it just goes on and on and on, regardless of actual words of someone
Yes.
communicating a story to you, right?
Yeah.
So what my question is for you, okay, is finally long setup there, but I wanted people to understand, like, when you say story, it's not like I used to think of it on a very surface level. Why are you telling me this story? Like someone actually actively telling me a story. But when you sort of really realize, like, oh, it's your mind buzzing all the time when telling yourself what the stories are actually. What I was going to ask you is, when did you know, or how did you get turned on to this idea of story? Where did this come from in your story? Like, why are you interested in this? How did you get interested in it? And how do you learn? How did you go about learning more about it?
Well, first, I just have to address something, a perception that you came up with, which is these internal stories. And it's really interesting, Jim, because I actually had not made this connection. I mean, I know about internal stories. I talk about that at various points in my workshops and seminars, but I love how you reduced it to, okay, on an everyday basis in this idea of 85% story, that you viewed it as not just the external communication,
Right.
but you went internal and viewed, okay, like you said, we're looking across the street and we see someone, and it may be oh, no, is that someone I recognize, or no, it's not a friend. It's I thought it was Jim, but
Right.
and so I love the fact. Can I use this? The fact that it's not just the external stories; it's the internal
Oh
stories that
my
we're
God. I think
telling,
internal is not much more interesting. Maybe that's equal or whatever. But
right?
I'll give you a little takeaway. Maybe you can remember this. And I tell people this all the time when you're talking to someone and they're frustrated or they're pissed off or they're whatever, and they don't think they're getting anywhere, whatever it is. It's
Right.
like, I tell them all the time, tell yourself a better story.
And
Like, this
that's
is a story you're
great.
talking about in your mind. You know how you change? You just tell yourself a better story.
Right. Change. It's like when you're
That's it.
dreaming and you. I don't know if you've ever been conscious during a dream, but you're like, wait a second, this is a dream. I'm choosing a different route in the dream, right? I'm choosing a different path, and so it's
Right.
that sort of thing.
That's right.
We can all change, not the ending, because the ending doesn't happen until we die, right?
Right.
But we can change the next chapter of our story,
That's right.
and we can change it in our mind before we get to that point. And that's something we all have to remind ourselves.
Yeah.
And but so Jim, you asked, how on earth did I get to where I am?
Right.
And
Right.
and
Like, what was interesting about, like, oh my God, like when you start to wrap your head around, story is powerful, story is interesting, story can be useful if you figure out that is important, or how it affects you, like.
well, my dad was an amazing storyteller. And his favorite mode of story were story jokes. Not set up punchline, but a joke that goes on for a minute or two or five, and you get to the punchline. Sometimes the punchline is just a groaner, but it doesn't matter. The punchline almost doesn't even matter, because it's how you've gotten there. And he would come up with these fun character voices and visual ticks and fun crazy stuff, right, as he was telling these stories. And so from a very early age, at the dinner table, at parties, wherever we were, he was telling stories. And so, and a lot of the time, his joke stories would sort of incorporate things that had happened, And I would recognize, oh, wait a second, he stole that from our life, and now he's incorporating it into this story that he's telling, his friends at a party. And so I loved that. And so when I went to college, there was, back when you didn't have film school at every single school. They had one film course at the college I went to. It was a small liberal arts college.
Okay.
And so I took that one film course and got really interested in making films and movies, and so I ended up getting accepted to NYU. I went to NYU in their grad film program, and then started working in the business. And it took me a while to realize that really the stories that I was working to help create professionally could have an impact, and that same sort of story technique could have an impact when I was actually living my life. And I'm trying to think back in one incident where I went in and I met with, it was Dennis Leary, who he's a comedian, actor, director, and we met about a project that he had written and was acting in and was going to direct. And I basically it was sort of a combination of a story and a problem solving session. It was a very complicated little movie. And I figured out a solution and sort of told him the story of how I was going to approach that. And in the interview, and 5 minutes later, after I literally walked out of his office, I got a call and he said, "Hey, I want to hire you." And I was like, "Whoa, that was quick." Because he'd said when I first sat down, I'm meeting with a couple other people, so I won't be making a decision for a couple of days. And I said, what prompted you to make that decision? And he said, because the story you told me about how you were going to make this thing happen. And I realized the power, Jim, we have incredible power with storytelling. A story, someone can ask, are you responsible? Are you on time? And you say, yes, I am.
Right.
Okay, great. On to the next question. However, if you answer that question and you answer it with a story about a situation you were in where you were responsible and you were on time, then all of a sudden the interviewer is going to remember that story. They're going to visualize you in that place. And so when it comes time, they're going to write down, say for instance, you're an assistant manager at a McDonald's, there was a French fry fire, right? And I put it out, I called the fire department, I called the manager to let her know what was going on. And so they're going to write down French fry fire on your resume. Well, when it comes time for that interviewer to hire someone, they're going to say, okay, there was the guy in the check shirt, glasses, and then the red-haired person, and then the person with a beard, and French fry fire.
Right.
Yep, that person, they could communicate on their feet. They could think, they were able to wing it in an interview, tell me a story about how they were responsible, so I know that they were responsible. And I want that person, they can communicate. And I want that person on my team. So whether you're using story to communicate in a job interview or a pitch for a product or a program, an app, whatever, or you're asking for funding, or you're managing a team, storytelling is an amazing connective tissue, right? It helps a leader connect with employees and managers and understand what the leader is trying to do, whether it's a team or a whole business. And so I've realized over the years the value and the power of story from preschool all the way up to till we're done, because it's how we communicate. And back to the 85%, for 10,000 some odd years, we as humans have been communicating. Jim, you mentioned a while back, how do we communicate about a lion or a saber-toothed tiger? And how did the cave people communicate about that before they actually had words? And it was through a combination of grunts and visual cues. And they would turn it into a story about don't go down by the river at dusk because there's a saber-toothed tiger there and he's gonna nail you. And so communication it's all about story. It's how we learn. It's how we express ourselves. And when we use story and story techniques to convey numbers and complex concepts, it can also help folks understand on a very base level what those complex concepts are about and retain that information. So that's That's ultimately, and again, we can use the technology. And so what I did was I got really excited in January and February as I was working on my various workshops and seminars and webinars using ChatGPT. And I thought, you know something? If I'm having anxiety about this, if I'm wondering how I'm going to use this, tons of other folks are.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so I actually set out and I wrote a book, and it's called ChatGPT Simplified. And it's a basic guide. It's an everyday non-tech guide for professionals who want to understand what this technology is and how they can use it. And I wrote it through the lens of a storyteller, because again, I'm technically minded. I understand technology and special
Mhm.
effects and cameras, et cetera. But I don't get into the weeds about, okay, how would you program this to integrate it, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
It's really meant as a quick, fun read. It's got lots of pop culture references. One whole chapter is about Alice in Wonderland and how her journey in Wonderland is very similar to our journey discovering and exploring ChatGPT and generative AI. And so it's a really, and I wrote it with enhanced by ChatGPT.
Oh yeah, you wrote the book with ChatGPT. That's
Yes,
great.
yeah,
Which is probably this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, this is how
it is.
most things are going to be done now. It just seems, just seems to be the case. Well, Richard, I can hear the passion about your storytelling career, man. I love it, and it's like I said, I've just sort of kind of figured it out maybe the last, 8 years for myself in particular about story and understanding what that means for marketing and branding, but really in, like I said, I think it's 100% of human communication, because we're always just walking around trying to do pattern recognition to make sure we're safe. And
Oh,
because of that,
totally.
we make up stories. Is this person good for me? Is this person bad for me? Is this technology good for me? Is it bad for me? We're always just anxiety ridden in always, whether it's for opportunity or that we're missing maybe, or because of fear or whatever it is. And Chat GPT, I guess, is the latest thing
Oh,
that's
it's the latest.
that's pushing us and pushing that anxiety button for us all. But listen, before we get out of here, I got a few questions, a couple questions. I like to ask people
Sure.
later in the interview, um, and one is uh, in terms of technology in general. Like you said, you're not a super technologist, but where does this open mind part come from you in terms of, you seem to be someone that gets excited when you feel anxiety versus fearful, right? And so has that been something that you've always had, or or is that something about a vision, or you're just being pushed into it because you don't want to be left behind?
Well, well, I guess let me say, Jim, that I come across as very excited, but there is a part of me that is anxious, doom and gloom. I mean, I don't know doom and gloom, but anxiety in terms of this technology and feeling like, how am I going to figure this out? And there are certain technologies that I don't really care about, that I don't get excited like this about. But in this case, I see incredible possibilities for creation, creativity, coming up with ideas. And so that, again, I think it goes back to my foundational mission and message, which is
Mhm.
becoming a better communicator, helping others become better communicators through story. And so that's why I'm on this sort of path to enlighten folks about the possibilities of AI in general and ChatGPT, Bard, Bing in specific, to use these. And like you said, you don't think you're a great writer. Well, next time you need to write something, start it in your own words and then throw it into ChatGPT and let it spit out. And then, but
Right.
it's an iterative process. And Jim, as I was writing my book ChatGPT Simplified, I was extensively using ChatGPT, but I would find that there were times when it was only 60% there, and or 80% there. And so I
Right.
would have to go in after the fact and stitch pieces together and come up with with my own transitions between sections, because ChatGPT isn't really good at writing long sections. And so don't let my excitement fool you and listeners into thinking that, oh, this is just so easy. it's a panacea for everything.
Right.
It isn't. It takes work. It takes work in terms of figuring out how to write the prompts so that you get a ChatGPT generates a response that works
Right.
within what you're trying to do. And
Mhm.
so I guess it's like anything, you have to work at it, you have to play with it, you have to experiment with it, and you have to have fun with it. And so I'm excited about the fun and the discovery and the exploration of story and storytelling with this new technology that we can use to just blow it out of the water. It's going to be incredible.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, okay. I love it. I mean, it's just the enthusiasm is there, man. I love it. Love it. I love it. And I feel the same way about it. I mean, it's incredible. And I bore people to death if I start talking about technology
Yeah,
or whatever,
exactly.
because they don't get as excited as I do. But uh, okay, well, but along those lines, okay, so in terms of leaning into these kinds of things and figuring it out and being excited to discover new things, I guess.
Hmm.
Is there what I call a reinvention revelation for people out there that you can share with us about this latest journey of kind of pivoting, doing something different, not going back and doing the same old types of jobs you were doing in the industry you've been in? What can you share with people that you might have discovered along the way about yourself or about business or about approaching things in a different way?
Oh, that's a great question, Jim. I think it has to do with passion. Um, I'm still working in the TV business as I transition
Mm-hmm.
to becoming a full-time consultant, storyteller, story wizard, or whatever you want to call it. If we want
Right.
to use story terms, but it's that passion for story and the creative process that have really bubbled up in me, and I've allowed to bubble up in me. So I would not that this is advice necessarily, but I would say what I've done is I've listened to that voice,
Mm-hmm.
and what really gets me going on a daily basis. And I love working with folks in terms of the creative process and figuring out how to incorporate story in daily lives, in work, in a professional capacity as well. And so I'm listening to that voice, and it's sort of flowing through me. And so as I find new technology like ChatGPT, AI, I'm embracing that, knowing that ultimately it can help me. But in the first few steps of using that technology, I may not understand it. I may not get it. I may need some help. And there are amazing resources. Jim, YouTube is an
Right.
amazing resource.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And ChatGPT, incredibly, is its own amazing resource. One of the best things you can learn to do is when you're inside of ChatGPT and you're going along and you come up against an issue, a challenge, a problem, a speed bump, is just type in, enlighten me a little bit more about this, or how can I get past this with the help of ChatGPT? It's
Mm.
weird. It's its own instruction manual.
Right.
And so, but folks can also think outside the box in terms of their careers, in terms of their approach to marketing, in terms of their approach to communication about a program, an app, a service, a product. Go into ChatGPT. When you come up with a question on a daily basis, plug it into ChatGPT and see what it answers.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to be blown away by the possibilities, because again, you're going to have 10 or 15 folks in the room with you who will help you think outside the box in ways that you never imagined possible.
Right. Right. Well, what I hear you saying is listen to the voice inside.
Mhm.
Don't and when you're in tune with that, and this is what I'm figuring out about myself too. When you're in tune with that, um, it's one way to decrease the anxiety and push those obstacles out of the way and lean in and figure out everything you need to figure out because your mission is what's most important,
Right.
right? And so that's let that lead the charge for you. That's what I heard you say there. So that's
Yes.
cool.
Yes.
That's a great thing to remind yourself of, to focus on. Richard, it's been awesome having you on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. Can you remind people about your website and the book that you mentioned? And there's also a free download. I noticed. I went to your website
There
to check
is.
this
There
out.
is.
So maybe you mentioned both of those. There's one, something you can buy, something you can download for free.
Hmm.
And where would you go?
Yeah. So my book is ChatGPT Simplified. Again, it's written in everyday language for everyone, even tech folks. There's some fun things in there. It's very easy to read. It's a quick read. It's got lots of fun information about how to harness the creativity through ChatGPT. And then my website is aiexplained.ai, aiexplained.ai. And on the website, if you scroll down, there's a free book which is ChatGPT case studies, which I've combed all these case studies, and there's some really interesting stuff that people have used ChatGPT for. And so that's it's always nice to read about someone else having used a technology in a way that you wouldn't have imagined, and seeing how they use it and are successful with it. So that's a free download.
Okay, sounds great. And of course, you're out there available for consulting, courses, coming up with whatever you need to come up with for people, right?
Yeah, down at the bottom, you can there's a connection point. You can email me, and hey, if you've got an idea, you need a course, you're looking for someone to come in and consult on storytelling and fused with technology, contact me.
Sounds good. Okay. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. It's been wonderful.
Thank you for listening to Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast. If you want to hear more, join our mailing list at jimjimsreinventionrevolution.com. See you next time. And remember, the revolution has just begun. So dig in, embrace the process of reinvention, and start realizing the success you've always dreamed of. Hey, revolutionaries, if you enjoyed today's episode and today's guest, let them know by commenting on their Facebook page, finding their Twitter handle or Instagram feed, and letting them know you heard them on Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast, and tell them what you got out of the episode, what you really liked, or how they inspired you. I know they would get a kick out of it, and will help others find the same value that you found.